carbon capture has been a technology that's been around for a long time, but under the last government, the government indeed that she served briefly as ministers in various roles, drove forward the investment in carbon capture, which we have continued. This isn't something that has just appeared in July last year. It's a technology that governments have recognised will play an important part in decarbonising our energy system. But it's also really important for particular parts of our industry which are now competing against imports from other parts of Europe that are being able to use CCUS. Cement is a particular example which the Peak Cluster project is looking at, but other clusters which the previous government supported, like the Viking cluster and the Acorn cluster, which we are taking forward, is important. And decarbonising cement might not seem like a particularly important topic to a lot of people, but it's actually absolutely critical. Around 40% of UK cement and lime production takes place in Derbyshire and Staffordshire. Cement is one of the foundational heavy industries that underpins growth around our economy. It's one of the most important substances we have to grow our economy, in fact. The industry was recognised in the industrial strategy as a foundational input for growth, and it's an economically important sector, around 350 million in gross value added and thousands of jobs in that industry. The challenge we have is how we future-proof that industry for the future, because there are a number of businesses who now want to buy low-carbon cement in order to construct their projects, but we also have cement production elsewhere in the world that is low-carbon, and therefore, in order for us to be competitive in that market, it is important that we find ways to do that as well. Now, as I said in the adjournment debate, there are other technologies around how we might create low-carbon cement, but they are not at a stage yet where that deployment can be delivered at scale, and so carbon capture is important. There is no route to net zero that doesn't involve carbon capture technology. And just a reminder why net zero is important. I know not everyone will agree on this, but given the fact we are living through climate change at a scale at which we as a country should be taking seriously our responsibilities to do everything we can, this is an important part of how we tackle it. But it's also an economic opportunity, not just creating thousands of jobs in carbon capture, but protecting thousands of jobs in the heavy industry that we don't want to see leaving this country to go elsewhere. And so it plays a strategically important part broadly in how we're going to deliver net zero, but also our economic growth and industrial strategy. Now, I do want to come just specifically to some of our points on the Peak Cluster, but I would just first of all repeat a point I made in the debate, the adjournment debate, and which she has made rightly around the voice of local communities. I'd just clarify, first of all, her point around the NSIP regime, which I think was designed to try and suggest the point she made, and maybe I misunderstood her, that somehow the government has contrived for the Secretary of State to make a decision on a particular project. The nationally significant infrastructure project regime exists, and indeed existed under the previous government, to recognise that there are some projects of a scale of which local councils can individually decide on, and that should be decided at a national level. That's a process that's been undertaken for many, many years. I want to be really clear, though, that doesn't in any way suggest any outcome from a process. Not only has there been no decision from government on this project, but it hasn't even been submitted for a decision by government at this stage. It is a long way from that process. So I'll give way in just a second. And so the point around the NSIP regime, I think, is quite wrong. Decisions are made based on applications that are submitted. No application has been submitted. And they are based on all of the facts, including, and I'll come back to this point after I've given way to her, on the community engagement that takes place, which has to demonstrate genuine community engagement, learning from the views of communities, not just a listening exercise, but a shaping exercise. That hasn't been concluded yet.
Mr. McVeigh.
So can the Minister confirm or not that the final sign-off of this project via a development consent order is done by the Secretary of State for Energy, i.e. by the government? Is that true or false?
Minister.
Well, I think I just said that in my remarks, Sir Roger, that the nationally significant infrastructure regime exists to make decisions at a national level by different Secretaries of State. In this case, it's an energy project, so yes, it's made by the Secretary of State for Energy. But she seems to be implying that somehow that is a predetermined outcome. It hasn't even been submitted for consideration. So I just think that's not a sensible position to take before the application has even been submitted. She also cast aspersions on the North Sea Transition Authority, which is an independent regulator. It was the Oil and Gas Authority for many years. It's now the North Sea Transition Authority. It has operated under governments of all political persuasions to make decisions about how we steward the North Sea and how we steward the licensing regime for oil and gas, but also increasingly for carbon capture. It makes those decisions independent from government. Ministers do not interfere in the decision-making of the NSTA. And again, she seems to be drawing conclusions from an independent regulator that is simply not fair on them, but also not accurate in fact. The other point I wanted to just... I'll give way.
Information.
The Minister has referred to the fact there has as yet been no application and therefore no ministerial decision, but that community engagement is a really important part of that decision-making process. My concern on behalf of my constituents is that they don't feel engaged with, they don't feel that they have a voice in this process, and they don't feel that they're getting information at all. I appreciate it is not the Minister's job to provide that information, but can he be extremely clear about the level of engagement that is required?
Minister, my own friends. And this was the point I was going to come to. Community engagement is absolutely critical. It's an absolutely firm expectation from ministers that any of these kind of large-scale infrastructure projects should have meaningful engagement with communities. But it's also absolutely critical for any project that wants to succeed in the NSIP process to demonstrate not only that they've carried out consultation, but actually that that has a meaningful impact on the shaping of the project. And that is one of the key factors in decision-making in NSIP applications. And I wanted to echo a point that was made in the adjournment debate on this subject, and many members have raised with me outside of debates in Parliament as well, about the need for extensive consultation on this particular project. I think criticisms have been levelled at the Peak Cluster that consultation hasn't yet been good enough with communities. I understand they are planning to do more, but it's not for me to direct them to do that. They must engage meaningfully with communities. Because once a proposal has been submitted, if that engagement hasn't been meaningful, it will count against that project. There's a wider argument, just a second, there's a wider argument here, though, about just in principle, it is important, and the government has said this from day one coming into office, that we build things as a country again, that we don't become a country that just spends decades talking about important infrastructure but never builds it. But that should never be done without proper engagement with communities, and communities feeling like they have had their say and that their say has been listened to. And this project is one example I would give of that, where much more of that has to happen, and I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Sir Roger, and thank the Minister for giving way. I think the important thing for my residents is, does this project work and is it safe? I think those are the two key points. I note my honourable friend for Wirral West is in his place. I know he's been challenging these plans on behalf of his community, as have I, as has my honourable friend, member for Congleton. And I think the important thing here is that this isn't a done deal, and that Peak Cluster needs to listen and they need to act on the community's concerns. Would he agree with all of those points?
Well, let me come to both of those points. First of all, let me just start with this point around this somehow being a government project. It is absolutely not, and that is why my answers to the Right Honourable Lady reflected the fact that private developers across the country right now in a whole range of sectors are developing private propositions for all sorts of things. Until they come to government, either with a request for funding or as part of the NSIP regime, the government doesn't have a view on whether they are government projects or not. They are not delivered by government. It's a private investment, and therefore it's for those companies engaged in it to put forward their proposition, and then government will take a view on it, as we do in all nationally significant infrastructure projects. So that's the first point about being a government project. It is absolutely not, and it is not one of the clusters that the government has initially taken forward. We're taking forward two clusters initially to drive forward carbon capture and storage. The Peak Cluster is not one of them. And I make that point again on the record. The second point my honourable friend makes, which I wanted to come back to, is this question about safety. It is really important to make the case that carbon capture and storage is not a new technology. It has been tried and tested across industry and across power generation at scale for a long time. Geological carbon dioxide storage has been in operation for decades. Norway has stored CO2 since 1996, more than 20 million tonnes stored so far. And our regulatory regime exists precisely to make sure that there is as safe and robust a regulatory regime to ensure those high safety standards as there possibly can be, and that will be at the forefront of any decisions about how we take this forward. Safety is absolutely critical, but it is not some novel technology. I'll give way in just a second. It is not a novel technology in which we don't understand the safety considerations. It is managed, understood and regulated effectively at the moment. I'll give way.
The Minister might not know this, and I see the member for Wirral West in his seat, and I appreciate he might not be able to speak today. But just to confirm that Wirral Council in its entirety, across all parties, objected to the Peak Cluster project. Does the Minister know that with his PPS sitting behind him?
I'm aware of that, and councils can take their view on a whole range of things. I mean, I don't think there's anything controversial about a council making their views known on a particular project. They're very welcome to do that. That's why we have democratically elected councillors in this country. Can I just come to to one final point the Right Honourable Lady has made a number of times, and other members have as well, about government funding for this project. And I know she draws a connection, and I understand entirely why, between investment the National Wealth Fund makes and the fact that it is wholly owned by the government. So I understand the connection. But it is equally not correct to say that that represents my department or the government's financial support for a particular project. The National Wealth Fund was set up to provide investment for important infrastructure projects, and they make the decisions independently from government. Ministers do not. I have not seen or signed off any funding applications for the Peak Cluster. The NWF makes those decisions in their own framework as set out by the Treasury and by Parliament, and it should not be taken as any indication of my department's support or otherwise for particular projects. Of course I will. Very, very briefly.
In terms of the personnel for that National Wealth Fund and the decision-making, what sort of people are on it? Who's evaluating this?
Well, I can write to her with the specifics of the Investment Committee, but the National Wealth Fund is set up independent from government to take stakes in projects on behalf of the British public, so we would own a stake in some of these projects instead of just handing out grants to things. We would actually own part of it. There's an Investment Committee that sets up these decisions, and the Treasury is the body responsible for the National Wealth Fund, but I can write to her with the specifics on it. No, I'm going to very briefly.
Did the Minister just say so that the government can part-own some of this? Was those the words he used?
The principle of the National Wealth Fund is that we can make financial investments in projects, and in some of those cases that means taking an equity stake. Sometimes it doesn't, but sometimes it does. And the National Wealth Fund's been around for long enough now. I'm sure members are aware of that. Can I just close, Sir Roger? Partly by reflecting something from the adjournment debate from the Honourable Member for Chester South and Edisbury and a number of other members who spoke in that debate that I just want to say. I understand any large-scale infrastructure project comes with concerns from local communities, and it is right and proper that local communities can voice those concerns in any way that they can. I would say that that has to be a respectful exchange of views, and I know that some of that has not been so far. But I also understand why there's a strength of feeling on this, and that's absolutely understandable. I think that exchange of views is important, and everyone who's listening to this debate or not should know that the government takes very seriously that community engagement, and therefore we would expect to see meaningful engagement with communities. But I would also say at the same time that the government has set out an ambitious plan to decarbonise our economy. That is important for a whole range of reasons, but it's also a hugely important economic opportunity for us as a country. Decarbonising hard-to-abate sectors such as cement and lime, which are critical to our economy, is difficult. CCUS is a route to do that. So it's not only essential for meeting our climate commitments, but also economic opportunities that it offers. Future project proposals are subject to scrutiny and high standards and a tough regulatory regime, and the government will look at all of this in the round on individual projects. And I repeat the point I made at the beginning, Sir Roger. This is not a project that the government is driving forward. It is not a project that we are saying we support or don't support, because at this point in time, no proposal has come before us to do that. In due course, we will do that. And in the meantime, I encourage everyone in the local community, members of Parliament and others, to engage with the process, and for the Peak Cluster themselves to engage with the process. I'm just rounding up. To engage with the process. And in the end, I hope that we will come to a view where communities do feel that they have been heard, where projects can move forward on their individual merits, and that will be part of a process when we come to it.